4 Apache widows sought shelter one night, and the rancher was never the same. His days were simple but lonely. He woke early to check the livestock, repaired fences, and worked the land. Most evenings he sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert sky with shades of orange and red. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to solitude. It was a quiet life, predictable and safe, and he liked it that way. Yet deep down he felt a strange emptiness, a longing for something he couldn't name. That evening the sky had darkened unusually fast. Heavy clouds rolled over the horizon and the wind picked up, tossing dust and dry leaves into the air. He could feel a storm approaching, one that promised rain and thunder. As he finished feeding the chickens, he noticed a movement near the edge of the property. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then he saw 4 figures, huddled together, moving slowly through the tall grass. They were soaked, their clothes clinging to their bodies and their hair plastered to their faces. Curiosity mixed with caution. He wiped his hands on his pants and walked toward the fence. "Hello, can I help you?" he called, his voice steady but uncertain. The figures stopped and one of them stepped forward, raising a hand in greeting. She was a woman in her late 30s with sharp, tired eyes that seemed to see through him. Behind her, the other 3 women shifted uneasily, as if unsure whether they should approach. We need shelter for the night," the first woman said, her voice soft but firm. "We have nowhere to go and the storm is coming." There was a strange calmness in her words, a quiet confidence that made him pause. He studied their faces carefully. They looked weary, not just from the journey but from something deeper, loss, hardship, and the weight of lives that had been too harsh. He hesitated. Normally, he would have turned strangers away. Strangers were unpredictable, and his life had taught him to be careful. But something in the way the woman spoke, in the way they looked at him, made him nod slowly. "Come in," he said. "You can stay in the barn. It's not much, but it will keep you dry." The relief that passed over the women's faces was immediate, almost tangible. They thanked him quietly and followed him toward the barn, their movements careful but hurried. Once inside, the rancher set to work lighting a small stove. The women huddled near it, rubbing their hands to warm them. The smell of damp clothes mixed with the earthy scent of hay and feed, but it did not bother him. He offered them blankets, and they accepted without hesitation, wrapping themselves tightly against the cold. As the storm raged outside, the rancher noticed the small details. The way one woman's hands trembled slightly, the way another kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. He realized these were not ordinary travelers. They carried stories etched into their very beings, stories of survival and pain. He did not ask questions at first. He simply moved about the barn, giving them space, preparing hot water and fetching extra blankets. Finally, after the worst of the storm had passed, the first woman spoke again. "We are Apache widows," she said quietly. The words hung in the air. The rancher stopped what he was doing, his hands paused mid-motion. He had heard of the Apache people, of their strength and resilience, but also of the hardships they had faced. "Widows?" he asked gently, unsure if he should press further. "Yes," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "We lost our husbands one by one to sickness and misfortune. We have traveled far, seeking safety and shelter." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a quiet strength that made the rancher feel both awe and respect. He nodded slowly, understanding that these women had endured more than most could imagine. He offered them food, bread, beans, and stew he had prepared earlier, and they ate in silence, though not with coldness. There was a dignity in their silence, a way of eating that showed they valued sustenance not just for the body, but for the spirit. The rancher watched them, feeling a strange warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in many years, he felt needed, important. Their presence was quiet but powerful, a reminder that human connection could arrive unannounced and change everything. The night grew darker, and the storm continued its relentless pounding on the roof of the barn. Lightning flashed, illuminating the wooden beams, and thunder rolled across the desert, shaking the ground beneath them. Yet inside the barn there was a sense of safety, a fragile comfort that came from shared presence. One of the younger widows began to hum a soft, haunting tune, a melody that spoke of home, loss, and hope. The sound was mesmerizing, and the rancher found himself listening, forgetting the hours of loneliness he had endured for decades. As the night wore on, they shared fragments of their stories. One spoke of her husband's kindness and the harsh desert that took him away too soon. Another recounted the journey across harsh lands to avoid dangers that lurked for vulnerable travelers. They did not complain, nor did they dwell on sorrow. Instead, they spoke with quiet dignity, honoring the lives they had lived and the loved ones they had lost. The rancher listened, feeling an unfamiliar stirring in his heart. He realized that in all his years of solitude, he had never truly listened to anyone in such a way. These women, strangers as they were opening their lives to him, trusting him without knowing him. He felt a responsibility, a bond forming not out of obligation but out of shared humanity. He understood that sheltering them for one night was more than a simple act. It was a meeting of fates, a turning point that neither he nor they could have anticipated. Hours passed. The storm finally began to ease, leaving the desert washed in silver rain. The women settled onto hay-strewn corners of the barn, exhausted but grateful. The rancher cleaned up the remains of their meal and stood by the door, watching them sleep. For the first time in decades, he felt the quiet stirrings of a new life, one that could include others, one that could be fuller, richer, and unexpectedly rewarding. Before he went to bed himself, he walked outside for a moment, feeling the rain on his face. The desert smelled alive, cleansed by the storm, and he realized that tonight the world had shifted slightly. The arrival of 4 Apache widows, weary from their journey and bearing the weight of grief, had changed something within him. He could not have predicted it, and yet he knew that life on the ranch and in his heart would never be the same again. As he returned inside, he made a silent promise to himself. He would protect them, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He would listen, help, and share this space that had been empty for so long. That night, sleep came slowly, but it came with a sense of peace he had not known in years. Outside, the desert lay quiet, as if the storm itself had acknowledged the beginning of something new. By the time dawn arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving droplets glistening on the grass and roof. The rancher looked at the women, still asleep, and felt a mixture of wonder and gratitude. He had opened his doors to strangers, and in return they had opened their lives to him. This night, so simple yet profound, had begun a journey that would alter all their lives forever. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long golden rays across the ranch. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and fresh. The rancher, who had spent decades in solitude, awoke early as usual. But today, the quiet was different. Instead of the familiar silence, there were small noises, soft footsteps, gentle rustling, and the faint hum of voices. He rose from his bed, rubbed his eyes, and looked around. The 4 women were awake, moving quietly around the barn, tending to the chores they had accepted as their own without complaint. The rancher felt a mixture of pride and unease. He had never shared his routines with anyone, never allowed another person inside his carefully controlled life. Now, he was watching strangers, yet not strangers, for their presence had already begun to feel natural, move around his home with care and efficiency. They fed the animals, swept the floors, and tidied up the scattered hay as if they had lived here for years. Each action was deliberate, thoughtful, and gentle. The rancher realized that this was no ordinary visit. These women were survivors. They were disciplined, observant, and capable in ways he had not expected. After completing their morning chores, they gathered around the small wooden table for breakfast. The rancher had prepared bread, eggs, and a simple stew, but the women contributed as well. One of them peeled vegetables and prepared a fresh salad from the small garden near the barn, while another poured water into bowls for the livestock. They worked together without speaking much, their movements synchronized in a quiet, unspoken rhythm. It was a beautiful sight, the blending of lives, the shared labor, and the subtle warmth that began to fill the once lonely barn. As they ate, the rancher noticed their different personalities more clearly. The first woman, the one who had spoken for the group, was quiet but commanding. Her eyes were always observing, taking in every detail of the surroundings. She spoke only when necessary, but her words carried authority. The second was gentle and nurturing, moving carefully around the barn, always checking that everyone had what they needed. The third was witty and full of humor, teasing softly to bring smiles to the others' faces. The last was quiet and reflective, rarely speaking but always listening, her sharp eyes noticing everything that went unnoticed by others. Conversation flowed slowly at first. The rancher asked questions, but only simple ones, about the road they had traveled, the places they had passed, and the weather. The women answered with honesty and clarity, never complaining, never exaggerating. Yet between the lines, he sensed the stories of hardship they carried. They had endured losses that few could imagine and traveled far from their homes to find safety. Each word they spoke carried the weight of experience and survival. The morning passed in a blur of activity. The rancher led them through the tasks that needed attention on the property, mending a broken fence, checking the water troughs, and feeding the cattle. At first, he expected resistance or hesitation, but the women adapted quickly. They asked questions when unsure and followed instructions with care. It was as if they were not strangers at all, but a family that had existed in this place long before he had arrived. He marveled at their resilience and their willingness to work together without complaint. By noon, a subtle bond had begun to form. The rancher found himself sharing small details of his life that he had never shared with anyone else. He spoke of his years on the ranch, the long days of solitude, and the quiet peace he had found in his routines. The women listened intently, nodding and asking gentle questions. They did not judge him for his years of loneliness. Instead, they accepted it as part of who he was. In turn, he listened to their stories more deeply than he had expected. He learned about their families, the loved ones they had lost, and the journeys they had taken across deserts and mountains, facing challenges that would have broken others. As the sun climbed higher, the heat began to press down on the ranch. The women worked tirelessly, fetching water, cleaning the barn, and preparing the afternoon meal. Their energy seemed endless, and their determination quiet but unshakable. The rancher, who had once relied solely on his own strength, felt both admiration and humility. He realized that these women had taught him a lesson without intending to. Life was not meant to be faced alone, and trust could bring strength beyond imagination. During a brief moment of rest, they sat together under the shade of a large mesquite tree near the edge of the property. The women shared small laughs, stories of childhood memories, and the occasional joke that brought smiles to even the rancher's weathered face. It was a sound he had not heard in years, laughter, genuine and free. He felt a warmth in his chest, a spark of connection that reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago. This was not just hospitality. It was the beginning of friendship, of shared life, of trust built slowly, day by day. Yet the day was not without challenges. One of the fences along the pasture had collapsed during the storm. The rancher and the women worked together to repair it, carrying heavy wooden posts, hammering nails, and tying wires. The work was exhausting under the midday sun, and sweat ran down their faces, but none complained. They coordinated silently, each understanding the other's movements, their past experiences shaping the way they handled the task. By the late afternoon, the fence stood firm once more, a symbol not just of protection for the cattle, but of the emerging bond between them all. As evening approached, the rancher invited the women to sit in the main room of the barn, where the fire he had built that morning still glowed warmly. He served tea and bread, and they talked quietly, sharing small insights about their lives. One of the widows spoke of her husband, a kind man who had been taken too soon, and the ways she had learned to survive after his passing. Another told of the journey they had made together, how they had supported one another in the harshest of conditions, and how they had learned to rely on each other. The rancher listened, captivated by their stories. He realized that each woman had a strength that complemented the others, a balance of wisdom, humor, courage, and compassion. Their presence had already begun to change his perception of the world, teaching him that life, even after loss and hardship, could still hold moments of beauty, connection, and meaning. He felt gratitude, a feeling he had not experienced fully in years. Night fell slowly, painting the desert sky with deep purples and reds. The women prepared for bed, laying blankets and making small sleeping spaces in the corners of the barn. The rancher walked among them, ensuring they were comfortable and had everything they needed. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had provided not just shelter but safety, and perhaps even a sense of belonging. Before retiring to his own space, the rancher stepped outside for a moment, looking up at the stars that shone brilliantly against the clear desert sky. The events of the day replayed in his mind, the laughter, the hard work, the stories, and the quiet moments of connection. He realized that the arrival of these women had transformed the ranch already. The once lonely property now felt alive with purpose and energy. He understood that this was only the beginning of something much larger, a change that would affect him deeply and forever. As he lay in bed, he thought about the women and their lives, the struggles they had faced, and the resilience they carried with them. He reflected on his own solitude and realized that opening his home to strangers had not been an act of charity alone. It had been an act of trust, courage, and humanity. The bond forming between them all was fragile, yes, but it was real, and it was powerful. He drifted to sleep with a sense of anticipation, wondering what the next day would bring, and how these women would continue to change the rhythms of his life. By morning, the ranch would no longer be the quiet, lonely place it had been for decades. The presence of the 4 Apache widows had brought warmth, life, and a sense of connection that the rancher had long thought impossible. Their energy, resilience, and quiet strength had begun to weave into the very fabric of the ranch, transforming it from a place of isolation into a home filled with hope and possibility. The rancher knew, deep in his heart, that his life would never be the same, and he welcomed that change with open arms. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch began to take on a rhythm that the rancher had never imagined. The 4 Apache widows had settled into a quiet routine, working alongside him from dawn until dusk, yet their presence brought more than just help with chores. There was a warmth to the barn and the land now, a sense of shared life that the rancher had not felt in decades. The mornings were busy, filled with the sounds of water being carried to the troughs, the clatter of dishes, and the soft hum of conversation. The afternoons were quieter, often spent repairing fences, tending the small vegetable garden, or simply sitting under the shade of the mesquite tree, watching the cattle graze. The rancher had begun to notice how each woman contributed in her own unique way. The eldest widow, whose eyes held both wisdom and sorrow, often took the lead in organizing tasks. She would instruct the others gently but firmly, making sure every chore was completed efficiently. Her presence commanded respect, yet there was no harshness, only calm authority. The second widow was the caretaker, always attentive to everyone's needs. She prepared meals, brewed tea, and made sure the barn remained clean and comfortable. Her hands moved with care, and her soft voice brought reassurance during long, tiring days. The third widow had a playful energy that brought laughter to the ranch, a rare sound that had been absent for so long. She teased the others gently, often making the rancher shake his head and chuckle, surprised at how easily her humor could lift the weight of a hard day. The fourth widow, quiet and observant, watched everything with careful attention. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were thoughtful and precise, often offering insights that none of the others had noticed. Together, they formed a balanced group, each woman's strength complementing the others in ways the rancher could not have imagined. It was during these weeks that a deeper bond began to form between the rancher and the widows. He found himself opening up in ways he never had before. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert sky in shades of pink and gold, they all sat outside, sharing stories around a small fire. The women spoke of their childhoods, of the villages they had grown up in, of games they had played, and of the families they had loved. Their voices carried memories that were sometimes joyful, sometimes tinged with sadness, but always full of life. The rancher shared his own stories, small glimpses of his past that he had rarely spoken aloud. He talked about his early years on the ranch, the hardships he had faced, and the solitude that had become his companion. The women listened patiently, nodding, occasionally asking gentle questions. For the first time, he realized that his life, once so quiet and lonely, was now enriched by the presence of others who truly cared about him, not out of obligation but out of genuine connection. One night, after the fire had died down, the eldest widow spoke softly about the challenges they had faced after losing their husbands. She described the strength it took to keep moving forward, to find shelter, and to protect one another in a world that was often unkind. Her words struck a chord with the rancher. He had always thought of himself as strong, able to handle any hardship alone, but he began to understand that true strength sometimes came from opening oneself to others, from sharing burdens and supporting one another. Over the following days, the rancher noticed small changes in himself. He smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and felt a warmth in his chest that he had long forgotten. The widow's resilience inspired him, their courage and determination reminding him that life could hold beauty even after loss. He began to look forward to their conversations, their laughter, and even their quiet moments of reflection. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with life, connection, and hope. The women, too, began to trust him more deeply. They shared not only stories of the past but also their fears and dreams for the future. One evening, the gentle caretaker spoke of a dream she had to cultivate a small herb garden, to grow plants that could heal and nourish. The playful widow shared her wish to teach local children games and songs, to pass on traditions that might otherwise be forgotten. The quiet, observant widow spoke of her longing for a place to write, to record the stories of her people so that they would not be lost. The eldest, wise and steady, dreamed simply of peace, a place where they could live safely and honor the memories of those they had lost. The rancher listened to each dream with care, feeling a deep respect for their courage and resilience. He realized that his own life had been small, limited by routine and isolation. These women had shown him that life could be bigger, richer, and more meaningful when shared with others. He began to think of ways to support their dreams, helping with the garden, creating a small space for writing, and even encouraging playful lessons for children in the nearby town. Their presence had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered, and he felt a quiet excitement about the future. Yet, it was not all easy. Life on the ranch came with challenges, and the women were not immune to the difficulties of the land. During one particularly hot afternoon, a group of cattle broke through a fence and wandered toward the rocky hills. The rancher and the widows had to work together quickly to round them up. The eldest widow took charge, directing the others with calm authority. The playful widow used her energy and agility to chase the cattle from behind, while the gentle caretaker soothed the frightened animals, and the quiet widow observed the movements of the herd, predicting their path. By working together, they managed to bring the cattle back safely, their combined efforts proving that trust and cooperation could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. After that day, the bond between the rancher and the women grew even stronger. They had faced a test together, and each had proven their courage, skill, and reliability. The rancher realized that he had come to depend on them not only for help with work, but for companionship and support. He began to see them as family, each woman's presence enriching his life in ways he had never imagined. Evenings were often spent in quiet reflection. The rancher would sit on the porch, watching the stars, and think about how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. The widows, too, would sometimes join him, sharing the silence, the beauty of the desert night, and the simple comfort of being together. They spoke little, but their presence spoke volumes. The rancher understood that trust and connection did not always require words. Sometimes, it was the quiet moments, shared without expectation, that bound people together most strongly. One evening, the eldest widow brought out an old, worn journal. She had been keeping it for years, recording stories of her life, her family, and her people. She offered it to the rancher, inviting him to read a few entries. As he read, he was struck by the depth of her experiences, the losses, the struggles, the moments of joy, and the resilience that had carried her forward. He realized that each of these women carried stories like this, stories that could teach, inspire, and guide. He felt honored to be trusted with even a small part of their lives. The rancher began to see the widows not as visitors, but as essential parts of the life he was building. They had transformed the ranch into a place of laughter, hard work, and shared purpose. The quiet strength of the eldest, the nurturing care of the second, the playful energy of the third, and the keen observation of the fourth had combined to create a harmony that touched every corner of the property. The rancher felt a sense of belonging he had never known, a realization that life was richer when shared with those who understood and supported one another. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between the rancher and the widows deepened further. They celebrated small victories, repairing a broken fence, a successful harvest from the garden, and the completion of a small writing space for the quiet widow. They shared meals, stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow closer and to learn from one another. The rancher felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had opened his home to strangers, and in return they had opened their lives to him. By the end of these weeks, the rancher realized something remarkable. His heart, long closed off by years of solitude, had begun to soften. He had learned to listen deeply, to care without hesitation, and to find joy in the presence of others. The ranch, once a quiet, lonely place, was now alive with energy, warmth, and shared purpose. The widows had brought more than help with chores. They had brought life, connection, and a sense of hope that had been missing for decades. And so, as the sun set on another day, the rancher looked around at the barn, the land, and the women who had become such an important part of his life. He understood that this bond was not temporary. It was lasting, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. The rancher, once alone, had discovered that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with others. The 4 Apache widows had not only transformed his ranch, they had transformed his heart, and he knew that he would never be the same again. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but it was not without its challenges. The rancher had grown used to the presence of the 4 Apache widows, and they had become an inseparable part of the daily life on the property. Yet as days turned into weeks, small tensions began to surface, not out of malice, but out of differences in habits, perspectives, and past experiences. The rancher, who had spent decades alone, found himself adjusting to the unpredictability of shared life. Meanwhile, the women, though strong and capable, were navigating their own vulnerabilities, carrying memories of hardship that sometimes clashed with the realities of the ranch. One morning, the rancher noticed a disagreement between the eldest widow and the playful widow. The playful one had decided to rearrange some of the tools in the barn, believing it would make chores easier. The eldest widow, however, preferred order in a specific way, a system that had been carefully maintained for years. Words were exchanged, not harsh but firm, each defending their own approach. The rancher watched, realizing that even in this harmonious household, differences could create friction. He stepped in gently, helping them find a compromise that honored both methods. It was a small lesson in patience and understanding, a reminder that relationships required effort, even among those who cared deeply for each other. Another challenge arose with the land itself. After weeks of rain from a late storm, parts of the pasture became muddy and slippery. The cattle struggled to move safely, and the rancher grew concerned about possible injuries. One afternoon, as they tried to lead the cattle back to the safer pastures, a young calf slipped and fell, crying out in fear. The women sprang into action, each responding in the way that suited their strengths. The gentle caretaker soothed the frightened calf, speaking softly and stroking its fur. The eldest widow coordinated the others, ensuring that no animal wandered into danger. The playful widow used her quick reflexes to guide the cattle away from the treacherous ground, and the quiet widow observed the surroundings, warning them of hazards before anyone else noticed. By the time the calf was safely back on firmer ground, the rancher realized how much he relied on them, not just for physical help, but for wisdom, courage, and calm in moments of crisis. It was a humbling experience. He had spent years believing he could handle everything alone, yet here were 4 women, strangers at first, teaching him daily that strength came in many forms and that cooperation could overcome the toughest challenges. Life was not only about work, however. Emotions began to surface, often unexpectedly. One evening, after a long day of tending the garden and repairing fences, the eldest widow shared a memory of her husband, lost many years ago. Her voice trembled slightly, a rare break in her usually steady demeanor. The rancher listened quietly, offering no words at first, only presence. Later, he placed a hand on hers, a simple gesture of comfort and understanding. The other widows joined in the quiet moment, creating a circle of support. That evening, the rancher understood something profound. Sometimes, the most important work was not fixing fences or feeding cattle, but offering compassion and shared strength to those around you. The following week brought a test of their collective courage. A wild coyote had been seen near the livestock, likely searching for food. The rancher knew that if left unchecked, it could harm the smaller animals. One night, as the group was settling in for dinner, they heard rustling near the edge of the pasture. The rancher grabbed a lantern and motioned for the women to stay close. Together, they approached the sound cautiously. The coyote, startled by their presence, darted away into the darkness. Though the immediate danger was gone, the incident left the rancher and the women alert, aware that living close to nature required vigilance, courage, and unity. As the days progressed, the challenges became more complex. The rancher noticed that the playful widow sometimes acted impulsively, taking risks without fully considering consequences. Meanwhile, the quiet widow often withdrew into thought, observing but rarely intervening, which sometimes left small tasks incomplete. These small differences could have caused conflict, but the eldest widow's steady guidance and the gentle caretaker's mediation ensured that harmony remained. The rancher learned to step back at times, to let the women navigate situations themselves, trusting in their judgment and their bond with each other. One particularly trying day came when a sudden heat wave swept across the desert. Temperatures soared, and the land seemed to sizzle under the sun. The cattle grew restless, and the water supply in the troughs began to run low. The rancher and the widows worked tirelessly, carrying water from the well, checking the animals, and ensuring that nothing was left unattended. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them all, and tempers flared briefly as frustration met fatigue. Yet in the midst of the struggle, laughter also emerged, small jokes, shared smiles, and moments of levity that reminded them why they had chosen to rely on each other. By evening, the crisis had passed, leaving the group exhausted but united. They sat together in the shade, sipping water and sharing quiet reflections. It was during these challenging times that the rancher began to understand the deeper lessons the widows were teaching him. Life was unpredictable, and difficulties could arise without warning. Solitude provided safety but limited growth. Connection, trust, and mutual support allowed people not only to survive but to thrive. The rancher realized that the challenges they faced together, fences breaking, weather extremes, and even the threat of predators, were shaping them into a true community, one built on respect, understanding, and shared responsibility. Even as the practical challenges continued, emotional growth became equally important. One evening, the gentle caretaker spoke of her fears, of never finding peace, of always feeling the weight of the past on her shoulders. The rancher listened, realizing that these women, despite their strength, carried burdens that were not easily lifted. He offered encouragement, reminding them that their courage and resilience had already carried them through unimaginable hardships. The playful widow added humor, lightening the moment with a gentle joke that made everyone smile, while the quiet widow offered thoughtful advice, her words measured and wise. Together, they created a space where vulnerability was met with understanding, not judgment. Through all these experiences, the rancher noticed changes within himself. He no longer approached life with rigid routines or solitary habits. He began to anticipate the needs of the widows, to consider their perspectives, and to adapt to situations with patience and flexibility. He realized that he had been strengthened by their presence, not just in terms of physical labor, but in emotional and moral growth as well. His heart, once closed and solitary, had opened to empathy, trust, and shared purpose. One late afternoon, the rancher and the women faced a particularly dangerous situation. A sudden flash flood swept through a small part of the pasture, threatening to wash away young calves. The rancher acted quickly, but the widows were already on their feet, coordinating efforts with calm efficiency. Together, they guided the animals to higher ground, using ropes and teamwork to ensure that none were harmed. The experience was exhausting, but it left a lasting impression. The rancher realized that the true measure of a community was not in easy moments, but in the way people came together during crises. He had witnessed courage, intelligence, and compassion in action, and he knew that he would never again view life the same way. By the end of the week, the rancher and the widows had faced storms, heat, wild animals, and the complexities of working together as a team. Each challenge had tested their patience, courage, and trust in one another. And yet, despite the difficulties, their bond had only strengthened. The rancher found himself smiling more easily, laughing without hesitation, and feeling a sense of belonging that he had never known. The widows, too, had begun to see him as more than a host. They saw him as a friend, a protector, and a vital part of their new lives. As night fell over the ranch, the group sat together in quiet reflection. The stars shone brightly, casting a soft glow over the desert. They spoke little, but the silence was filled with understanding and mutual respect. The rancher realized that life was not about avoiding challenges or living in isolation. It was about facing difficulties together, learning from one another, and growing stronger as a result. The 4 Apache widows had brought him lessons that could not be taught in solitude, lessons about courage, trust, patience, and the enduring power of human connection. By the time he retired to his own space that night, the rancher felt a profound sense of gratitude. The challenges they had faced together had transformed not only the ranch but his heart as well. He understood that life, unpredictable and often difficult, could also be beautiful, full of growth, and enriched by the presence of those willing to share their lives. The ranch, once a quiet and lonely place, had become a home in the truest sense, alive with trust, resilience, and shared purpose. And so, as sleep came, the rancher reflected on the journey so far. The trials they had faced had been many, but each one had brought them closer together, teaching lessons that no book or teacher could provide. He knew that the coming days would bring more challenges, but he also knew that they would face them together, with courage, wisdom, and unwavering support. The rancher, once solitary and cautious, had discovered a life of connection, trust, and shared resilience, one that would forever change the course of his days. The seasons slowly changed, and the ranch, once a quiet and lonely place, had grown into a vibrant home. The 4 Apache widows had become an inseparable part of life there. The rancher, who had once lived in solitude for decades, now woke each morning to the sounds of voices, laughter, and shared activity. The barn, the garden, and the pastures had become places of community and warmth. He had never imagined that life could feel this full, this connected, this alive. The rancher had changed in ways he had not anticipated. He was no longer merely a man tending to land and livestock. He had become a teacher, a listener, and a friend. The widows had taught him patience, courage, and the power of trust. In return, he offered them stability, shelter, and a safe place to rebuild their lives. Together, they had created a bond that went far beyond mere necessity. It was built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the recognition of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert hills, the rancher noticed that the widows were particularly busy in the garden. Rows of vegetables, herbs, and flowers flourished under their care, a symbol of their resilience and hope. The gentle caretaker had taught the rancher how to tend the plants with care, how to nurture them patiently, and how to celebrate small victories when a seed sprouted or a flower bloomed. The playful widow had added bright decorations, painting small signs to mark the different plants and making the garden a joyful, lively space. Even the quiet widow had contributed, carefully arranging the herbs in neat rows and cataloging them for future reference. The eldest widow, whose wisdom and strength had guided the group through countless challenges, surveyed the garden with quiet satisfaction. "We have built something beautiful here," she said softly. Her voice carried both pride and humility, reflecting the journey they had taken together. The rancher, standing nearby, felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that this garden was more than just plants. It was a reflection of the transformation that had taken place in all of them. The barren, lonely ranch had become a home filled with life, hope, and purpose. Their days continued to blend work and connection. The rancher taught the widows more about caring for the livestock, about repairing fences, and about the patterns of the desert weather. In turn, the widows shared stories, songs, and lessons from their heritage. They laughed together, solved problems together, and supported one another in times of fatigue or frustration. The rancher marveled at how much he had learned from them, not only about work and survival, but about resilience, empathy, and the beauty of human connection. Yet, even as life settled into a joyful rhythm, the day came when the widows knew they would eventually leave. They had found a place of safety and growth, but they also longed to continue their journey, to honor the memories of their families, and to carry forward the strength they had rebuilt. The rancher felt a mix of emotions, pride in their courage, gratitude for their presence, and a quiet sadness at the thought of saying goodbye. He understood that their time together had been a rare gift, one that had forever changed him. The morning of their departure arrived. The air was crisp, and the desert sky glowed with the soft light of dawn. The widows packed their few belongings carefully, ensuring that nothing was forgotten. The rancher helped them with the last preparations, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. The eldest widow spoke first, her voice steady but warm. "You have given us more than shelter," she said. "You have given us trust, safety, and a home. We will carry this with us always." The rancher felt a lump in his throat, unable to find words that could fully express what he felt in return. Before leaving, the widows walked through the ranch one last time. They touched the fences, the garden, and the barn walls, remembering the hard work, the laughter, and the quiet moments of reflection. The playful widow paused to paint a small symbol of a sun on the barn door, a mark of their presence, a reminder of the joy and warmth they had shared. The gentle caretaker planted a new row of flowers near the well, a small gift to the land that had sheltered them. The quiet widow left a handwritten note filled with observations, stories, and wisdom to be found by the rancher in the days to come. The rancher watched them leave, his heart full. The desert, once silent and lonely, seemed alive with memories of the weeks they had spent together. He realized that he was not the same man who had opened his door on that stormy night. The widows had brought courage, laughter, and connection into his life, teaching him lessons that he would carry forever. The ranch, too, had changed, transformed by their presence into a place of warmth, growth, and shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, the rancher reflected on the journey they had shared. He walked through the garden, tending the plants that the widows had nurtured, and marveled at how much life had grown. He repaired fences with renewed energy, remembering the teamwork and determination that had carried them through challenges. He spoke aloud to the empty barn at times, sharing memories and stories, as if the walls themselves could hear and remember. The lessons of trust, patience, and resilience were now woven into every corner of the ranch. The rancher also found himself changed in quieter, deeper ways. He approached life with greater empathy, recognizing that every person carried stories, struggles, and strength hidden beneath the surface. He smiled more easily at neighbors and visitors, listening with patience and care. He felt gratitude for the smallest things, the warmth of the sun, the sound of water in the troughs, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Life, once measured only by tasks and routines, now held depth, connection, and meaning. One afternoon, as he rested under the mesquite tree, he found the handwritten note left by the quiet widow. Reading her words, he felt a mixture of nostalgia, inspiration, and quiet joy. She had described their journey, the moments of laughter, the small victories, and the lessons learned. Her words reminded him that their time together had not been fleeting, it had been transformative. He realized that the true impact of their presence was not only on the physical ranch, but on his heart and mind. The rancher smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. Months passed, and the seasons shifted once more. The ranch continued to thrive under his care, the garden growing lush and vibrant, the livestock healthy and strong. Visitors occasionally stopped by, drawn by the beauty of the land and the calm strength of the rancher. Yet he always carried within him the memory of the 4 Apache widows, their laughter, their courage, and the lessons they had imparted. They had arrived one stormy night, weary and in need of shelter, and in return they had given him far more than he could have imagined: connection, trust, and a renewed sense of life. In quiet moments, the rancher would stand at the edge of the pasture, watching the sun set over the desert hills. He would think of the widows, wondering where their journey had taken them, hoping they had found peace and happiness. And though they were no longer physically present, their influence remained, etched into the land, the barn, the garden, and his heart. He understood that life was full of unexpected encounters, moments that could alter the course of a person's life forever. The arrival of those 4 women had been such a moment, and he knew he would never forget it. In the years that followed, the rancher continued his work with renewed purpose. He shared the lessons he had learned with neighbors and travelers, speaking of the importance of trust, cooperation, and compassion. He maintained the garden, the barn, and the fences, each task a reminder of the teamwork and resilience that had shaped his life. Visitors often commented on the warmth and vibrancy of the ranch, sensing the quiet strength and deep connection that permeated the place. The rancher would smile, knowing that much of that spirit had come from the presence of 4 extraordinary women who had arrived one stormy night and forever changed the course of his life. As the sun dipped below the horizon on another calm desert evening, the rancher stood at the edge of the pasture, looking out over the land that had been his home for decades. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for the land and his work, but for the relationships that had transformed him. The 4 Apache widows had taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. That strength often comes in quiet resilience, that true courage is found in caring for others, and that even brief encounters can leave lasting marks on the heart. The rancher smiled as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a storm, a knock on the door, and the arrival of 4 women in need of shelter. He understood now that life was unpredictable, full of challenges, joys, and unexpected gifts. His heart, once closed off by years of solitude, had been opened by trust, connection, and shared experience. And though the widows had continued their journey elsewhere, their influence remained eternal, woven into the ranch, the land, and the rancher himself. He knew that he was and would always be changed for the better,